Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first ever Bayou Cultural Gathering. My name is Shauna Walton. I'm the president of the Louisiana Folklore Society, the organization that helped sponsor this, and we are delighted to welcome you to the first time when we are trying to bring the Cultural Coast together. To help get this effort moving, we have launched this discussion series and a series where we can all bring our ideas together. And I hope you stick with us for the entire year as we go through our Bayou Culture gatherings. We've hired a program director to lead our effort, Dr. Mike Saunders. We're delighted to have him here. He has a deep background in both culture and environment, and cultures dealing with deep environmental change, not only here, but also in other places in the world. So I'm very happy to welcome you here and happy to introduce you to Dr. Mike Saunders.
Thanks, Shauna. As Shauna noted, I'm Mike Saunders. I am the recently hired program director for the Bayou Culture Collaborative. And I do come from, well, I grew up on Chocolate Bayou. We have bayous on the Gulf Coast of Texas, but so if you hear me slip into that, that's just how I was raised. I'll repeat Shauna's sentiments and say, truly, welcome to our this gathering, the inaugural gathering in our year-long series. I know that in addition to Shauna and I speak for the entire Bayou Culture Collaborative team when I say we truly appreciate your attendance and your participation. Many of you may be familiar with the Bayou Culture Collaborative, but for those of you that are not, I'd like to review a few things. Primarily, while restoring the physical coast has received a lot of focus, a lot of funding, cultural issues have received much less attention. So the Bayou Culture Collaborative is organizing these gatherings as an opportunity to hear from others, to gain new ideas, and to connect those concerned with the cultures of coastal Louisiana. In this way, we hope that not only can we coordinate our individual efforts, but that as well, we can gather data to share with the scientific and the environmental research communities. So there are some underlying values that drive our work. We at the Bayou Culture Collaborative believe that we do need to support the cultures of coastal Louisiana and connect what we are calling the cultural coast. We feel that very strongly that we need to include cultural voices in coastal planning and incorporate culture in discussions of community resilience. We feel it's very important to engage and are working hard to engage the Arts and Culture Network, especially in that we feel if we can mobilize and support artists, we can help spread awareness that this is not just a coastal issue, this is not just a regional issue, but a statewide issue. To this end, there are several questions that we here at the Bayou Culture Collaborative ask. And we can use these questions to kind of frame not only today's gathering, but in fact, the series itself. So we ask, in the face of social and environmental change in Louisiana, what can we do and what can we be doing into coastal planning? However, importantly, we do want to note that we do not have all the answers. And in fact, that's why we're here. We do not promote specific adaptation or management strategies, nor do we encourage people to make the very tough decision to leave their homes, to stay in their homes in the face of adverse environmental impacts. We also want to acknowledge that we are aware that people have different levels of knowledge and awareness about some of the issues that we discuss. Don't be intimidated if you feel that you're not as informed as others. That's what we're here for, to learn from one another, to spread awareness and to collaborate on these issues, to start a conversation about these issues. As well, we do know that some of our discussions will touch on sensitive subjects. We will try to tread carefully, and this is an inclusive collaborative. We want everybody's perspectives. So, you know, the driving force behind our work here is we really do feel that if we work together, we network, we can do a far better job at exploring these issues and considering our options.
I'm going to jump in here and say that I'd like to thank our funders and partners in this effort. A lot of people came together to make this first gathering possible. Our partners include the Louisiana Folklore Society, of which I'm a member, and I encourage you all to sign up. The Center for Bayou Studies at Nicholls State University, which has made Mike a research fellow there. The Center for Louisiana Studies at the University of Louisiana Lafayette, and the Folk Life in Louisiana program. We have received funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Louisiana Office of Cultural Development, and the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. Today, we're going to have a talk by Jonathan Foret, who Mike will introduce in a moment. Then we'll have a question and answer session in breakout groups. And then we're going to, you'll see us talking about what our hopes for the coast are. We'll make some announcements about the next meetings. And at the end, there'll be time for informal visiting. This is actually a re-recording of our first meeting. We accidentally lost part of that recording. So the first part of this meeting is going to be a re-recorded part of that, including our speakers' talk. And then we'll join the original recording after our breakout sessions.
Thanks, Shauna. With that concluded, I am excited to introduce today's speaker, Jonathan Foret. Jonathan is the Executive Director of the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center, an organization that produces educational programs focused on developing adaptation skills in the youth of coastal Louisiana, in a means to ensure not only the preservation of culture, but of a viable workforce. He and a team of talented volunteers also produce the Rougarou Fest in Houma, which has been featured in several national magazines, including Southern Living and Women's Day. As well, I'd like to note that Jonathan makes Houma his home. He lives in Houma and was raised in Chauvin. So he obviously has a very personal connection to the issues that we are not only discussing as a whole, but that he will be talking about. And with that, Jonathan.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Mike, and thanks to all of you for joining us here today for the kickoff of our program. Our question for today is, how important is culture to a community's tenacity? Now, I could have used the word resilient here, but it was tired and it needed a break, so I looked for a word that fit a little bit better. Resilience is about our ability to adjust to challenges, whereas tenacity is about our willingness to carry on despite those challenges. After just going through Hurricane Ida and suffering alongside the people of my community and working to put the pieces back together again, I feel much more tenacious than I do resilient. And so I want to start off first with talking about why culture is important to include in the land loss conversation. I mean, it seems like it would be pretty evident, but it's taken some time for that concept to sink in. We've been working hard to extend the lifespan of coastal Louisiana because people like living here. And our culture plays a huge part of why we like living here. I mean, I don't think anybody lives here for the hurricanes or the mosquitoes, right? So consider this. Louisiana has the highest population of native-born residents in the country. That means you're born here, you live here, you learn how to make a roux, and then you die here. And nobody's really moving into the state. Here's one more thing to think about. When people do move in coastal Louisiana, it's usually one town north and up the same bayou. Now I'm living proof of that. My dad grew up in Cocodrie, married my mom, and moved one town up to Chauvin on the same bayou. When Hurricane Juan flooded our house in 1985, we moved one town up to Berg along the same bayou. And then when it came time for me to buy a house, I moved one town up to Houma on that same bayou. Now, one of the downsides of this is that there's not a whole lot of cross-pollination of ideas or beliefs. But on the positive side, it's a pretty good indicator that culture and sense of place are some of our greatest strengths. And we need to play to those strengths right now more than ever. Our culture and sense of place keep us grounded and provide us with the support that we need to get through hard times. And I want you to know, when I talk about sense of place, know that you can move up the bayou and 100% still feel connected to down the bayou. For example, I bet at least 75% of the people in this group have either driven an ice chest of shrimp or received an ice chest of shrimp from over 100 miles away at some point in your life. Why would you do that? Because it connects us to that sense of place. You drive through any bayou community on the morning of Easter Sunday with your windows down, and your vehicle will be filled with the smell of onions cooking. That smell is my sense of place. Let's talk about the rougarou. It doesn't matter if you think the rougarou is real or not. What matters is that the rougarou connects a group of people with the same cultural identity and makes us all feel like we know all the inside jokes. And since I know that I won the first bet about that ice chest of shrimp, I am willing to say that 80% of the people in this group have been on vacation somewhere. They heard someone talking in a flat accent. You had to go and ask where they were from, and you find out they live in Thibodaux. And look, if we're talking about Disney World during Mardi Gras, forget it. The down the bayou people take that place over. Even Mickey Mouse starts talking with a flat accent that week. "Mais Goofy, don't be a tête deux. That's not how you use a fishing pole, no." And if you're from the bayou, you think that's funny because you know what the words mean and you get the inside jokes. You have a seat at the cool kids table and that makes you feel good. I'm just going to share one more example. In high school, Miss Debbie Guidry was my chemistry teacher, still one of my all-time favorite teachers. And we had to do a lab one day that required Bunsen burners. So there's all these gas lines running through the classroom and they get connected to the burner so that you can do chemistry experiments. Don't worry, nobody got hurt. So I have everything connected. I turn on the gas, I click the striker, and this huge flame shoots up to the ceiling. And it's making this loud noise like the space shuttle's about to launch. So Miss Guidry runs over to shut off the gas and she yells at me, "My God, Jonathan, you're not trying to ball crabs." And the whole class starts laughing because we got the inside joke. We all had families with boiling pots and butane tanks. And not only do we know that sound, but we also know what comes with that sound. Somebody's cooking something delicious and people are about to have fun. That sound is a part of my sense of place. Aside from the connection that culture gives us, it also gives us a very intimate understanding of coastal land loss issues in a way that many scientists and engineers may not understand. In order to boil seafood in those big pots, you have to catch the seafood. When I was about 8 years old, I started working on trawl boats with my dad in the summer. And he'd tell me stories of how the land was washing away. My dad knew how the tides and the currents worked to catch the most shrimp. Now he knew that because he probably started trawling when he was 5. As I got older, I began paying closer attention. And I watched land disappear from one trawling season to the next. Places that had land before became places where we could trawl the next year. Our culture and experience give us the type of local knowledge that can't be learned in school. Remember, play to our strengths. Louisiana ranks pretty low in the nation when it comes to education. But none of those standardized tests are asking questions about why you should keep the wheel wash out of the trawl. Now, that one's for the trawlers out there, and y'all are laughing because that's an inside joke. And y'all at the cool kids table. That type of local knowledge gained through our culture is usually minimalized, disregarded, and sometimes shamed. And that needs to change. For our sake and the sake of our state, that really needs to change. I know you might say, oh, it's going to take a while for that to sink in, but we're out of time on this one. We really need culture to have a seat at the land loss table. Now, that's a different table than the cool kids table, but they're not far apart. Let's talk about disruption. Pandemics, political unrest, alien abductions, social media, labor shortages, war, illness. When I think of disruption, I think about when my dad passed away from cancer. My mom and I were by his side when he died at home. And we watched from the porch as the hearse drove his body away from the house for the last time. We both broke down crying. And my mom said that she felt like she had just gone through a hurricane and she didn't know where to start to pick up the pieces of what was left. Fast forward 5 years, and Hurricane Ida has left me with that same punch to the gut feeling. That's the type of disruption that we're focused on. The environmental disruption, some natural, some man-made. We're talking about the disruption caused by building levees and changes made to hydrology and canals dug for industry. And look, I'm not passing judgment on these things or telling you that they were good or bad. I'm just saying disruption occurred. Less sediment reached certain areas that needed it, but those areas may have become better for oysters. More land erosion created more spawning habitat for fish. Water was forced to flow in different directions, so some places became worse for fishing while others got better. We're also talking about disruption from sea level rise and more frequent tidal flooding. And we're talking about disruption caused by hurricanes that are becoming more frequent, wetter, and stronger. Now, what's important to remember is that disruption is a part of human history. We can and should look to the past for inspiration on how to handle disruption. As a Cajun man with ancestors who were a part of the Great Expulsion, I can tell you, this isn't my people's first rodeo with disruption. They were forced out of their communities and onto boats while their houses were set on fire. And about half of them died from disease, starvation, or they drowned in shipwrecks. That was 1755. So fast forward through a few more wars, some hurricanes, the pandemic of 1918, a few more wars, some hurricanes, and we get to another pandemic and Hurricane Ida. I mean, we just eat disruption for breakfast because we're tenacious and maybe a little bit crazy, but it's the fun kind of crazy. So disruption is all around us. And one way for us to manage or cope with that disruption is to intentionally engage our culture. That's our superpower, remember? It's our local knowledge gained from our culture that has prepared us to deal with hurricanes. Look, I don't eat potted meat or Vienna sausages, but I still buy them at the store if hurricanes coming. You fill your tub with water before the storm so that you have drinking water, and you get buckets of water from the bayou to use to flush your toilets if the water goes out. Or you have a cistern. You make sure that you fill up your car with gas and you fill up any empty gas cans. And most importantly, make sure that you have a lot of good stories to tell about past hurricanes, because y'all gonna be your own entertainment for the next few days. And look, I'm not sure what you can make with a pack of frozen shrimp, some tamales, and a piece of salt meat, but once the power goes out and your freezer starts to thaw, you're gonna have to figure that out. Come on, we have been training for this our whole lives. Now for me, Hurricane Ida was a different type of storm. Just like Laura, Katrina, Maria, and Sandy were probably a different type of storm for a lot of people. This storm has reshaped our community, and I mean that both literally and figuratively. Our community was in survival mode for a few months after the storm, and most days it still feels like that. It was the first time that my family ever seriously talked about, if we move, where would we move to? Where do we go to escape climate change? What do I do for work? What culture would my son grow up with? What traditions do I want him to have as he gets older? Do I really prefer Coke to Pepsi? I mean, it was a lot to digest, but it slowly started sinking in. And I remember an idea I read from a Native American writing. I thought of myself as a future ancestor. And I asked myself, what will my great-grandchildren wish I would have done? And it made me realize that I need to take my life off of autopilot and stop watching TikTok videos. I don't want life to be something that just happens to me. I want a more meaningful experience for me and my family. And the idea of bestowing my culture to my great-grandchildren keeps me grounded and focused while all the disruption is trying to disrupt. We're in a place right now where all of this must be done with intention. We can't really rely on traditions being passed down easily from one generation to the next without a clear path forward. There's too much disruption for that to happen the way it used to. We have to identify the traditions that are most meaningful to us and take deliberate actions to carry those traditions forward. Being fluent in Louisiana French is important to me, and I want my son to be able to speak it. I have the resources around me to make that happen, but I've never done it. My great-grandchildren would have wished that the language did not die with me. And as their future ancestor, I can and will fix that now with decisions that I make intentionally. I like to use the term trunk of traditions to visualize a collection of the traditions that are meaningful to me, that I want to pass down to my family. In my trunk, there's stories of the rougarou, how to harvest thistles in the spring, how to speak Louisiana French, boiling seafood and sharing it with the people that I love, and even a few people that I don't. Trunk of traditions. You should try that. And as you begin deciding what goes into your trunk, it's really important to understand that culture has to respond to the needs of the people that hold it at that time. Technology shapes the way that we experience culture. For example, Mr. Terry Laprouse's family at Robinson Canal used to dry shrimp on the docks in the sun, but he later developed the technology to dry them in big electric dryers. He improved the process, but the essence of the tradition remained the same. Now, I often imagine that 3D printers will become so advanced that we get to see Star Trek style food replicators that can make gumbo and potato salad. Those recipes and flavors will have to be input into the computer by someone. So it's our job now to make sure that future generations get those flavors right. The essence of the tradition remains the same across generations. That's what's important. And I'm sure people are still going to be arguing about whether the potato salad goes in the gumbo or if it's put on the side. It's all beginning to sink in. We have a battle ahead of us, but we know our strengths and we need to play to those strengths. Our culture is our superpower. Our culture is what gives us the tenacity we need to face this disruption head on. It's time for culture to have a seat at the land loss table. And it's time for local knowledge to be respected by others, and more importantly, by ourselves. So that way, when we ask ourselves, what would our great-grandchildren wish we would have done? we can feel confident that we did everything we could to keep their culture intact and create a stable sense of place for them, no matter how far up the bayou they have to move. Thanks for spending this time with me. I really hope that some of the things that I've shared with you really sink in and motivate you to be more intentional with how you engage with your culture and how you plan on sharing the essence of those traditions with the generations that come after you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. That was fantastic. Now we're going to take a few minutes and we're all going to divide up into some breakout rooms for a short discussion, based upon what Jonathan was talking about. We'd like you all to kind of spend some time discussing, with this disruption increasing, what will our great-grandchildren wish we had done? So we'll divide up for 10 minutes. After that, if you would like to briefly present what your group talked about, you can post it in chat, or you can raise your hands, and Maida Owens with the Louisiana Folklife Program is going to help me out here and will direct me to a few of you, and we'll share some of your discussion points. Thanks, you guys. We'll see you in a few minutes.
So welcome back, everybody, and you can share your thoughts in the chat. We'll have a small time, or raise your hand using the little reaction below if you'd like to have something to share, and Maida's going to call on people.
Okay, Gary, I think you were first. You want to unmute yourself and speak to the group?
Hey, it's great to be here. I think the person from our group that should talk is Honora Burris from Prairieville. I don't know if she really wants to, but I'm saying that she should. So thanks for including me. I really enjoyed Jonathan's talk. I'm going to sit back and listen.
Okay. Let's see, David Sheremy, you have your hand up too. You want to unmute yourself?
I'm trying. There we go.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, I had to do it and get authorization. Yeah, I wanted to just was that 10 minutes? That really, that couldn't have been 10 minutes because we'd had all that time to talk. Excuse me, I just finishing lunch here. Brad Davis, Maureen Lonigan, I think her name, two people I know, and Dr. Ray Brasseur, one of my all-time heroes, mentor, role model for me, and I'm David Sheremy. Used to be director of Coderfield Bayou Main District, and now I'm just having lunch by myself at home, waiting for my wife to come back from work. But yeah, language, of course, is our main focus, and Dr. Ray talked about that also. Let's see, somebody else is talking about French language in our culture. He's working with the Pointe-aux-Chênes Indian tribe down in Pointe-aux-Chênes, and kudos to Natalie Janko in her latest book talking about the difference between Pointe-aux-Chênes and Pointe-aux-Chênes, which is not at all the same thing. Well, it's the same area, but there's a reason why it's different. Yeah, the preservation of the language is primordial to the preservation of the culture, and I would like to be able to have a day where I can walk down the street of Lafayette in the new park we have, Park Marcus here, and just talk to people in French and not even knowing the people, just assuming that these people will speak French, going to the checkout line. I know that's a very lofty and maybe a high bar to reach, but I think it's more attainable than stopping those the football field of disappearing every 15 minutes when you're coming across with climate change and all the other forces, because this is something within our control. We can make these conscious decisions to speak French and getting the French language back into our schools. Some of my former colleague Elaine Clément, also we worked together very hard at Coderfield, get French into the schools. But so yes, that's primordial. But Brian brought up a good point that it's kind of different. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but he talked about preserving the artifacts we have today. Because I just recently went through a whole bunch of pictures about my father who fought in World War II, and I found out some stuff about him that I didn't know, and we talked a lot. My father had a very good relationship, and there won't be any. Everything's digitized. Everything's in the cloud. how are we going to be able to show our grandchildren, great grandchildren, what life looked like here in the early 21st century, when who knows what's going to happen to all those electronic images. So we need to find a better way to have more physicality, I guess. I think that's the word he used, to our artifacts and our preservation of what we're doing now, so they can understand, well, how did we get here? What did they do in 2021? What the hell happened in 2020 during the pandemic and all that? What was that all about, and they won't know because it won't be those physical artifacts. So that's basically what we talked about for that 10 minutes that I don't think we were actually 10 minutes, but I'll shut up now and listen to somebody else.
Okay, thanks, David. Anna Raburus, are you here? Gary LaFleur had suggested that you report out for his group. For y'all.
Yes, I'm here. So,
Hey.
yeah, we were kind of talking a little bit about the master plan situation, and I had mentioned about the traditional ecological knowledge study I had done when I was at CPRA, that unfortunately, because I recognized that very issue of not incorporating what the local folks really cared about into some of the master planning efforts and the cultural heritage, especially as it was tied to the ecological situation. And it was a fantastic project. And unfortunately, there was a bunch of reorganization in our agency right as we were wrapping it up. Many of the people that worked on that project left and are still doing doing similar work elsewhere. But we also talked about the culture at the agency, and why that is a big part of it. Part of why I retired, because the type of things I was interested in doing along these lines were not being done, and I wasn't allowed to do them. And so I'm hoping to be able to be more engaged. But I also talked about, I have the same situation in my own community of Prairieville. We're not heard. Our culture has totally changed, not by everybody leaving, but by everybody coming in and overwhelming us. What used to be a very rural community when I moved here 40 years ago is been overwhelmed with refugees from the coast, from Baton Rouge, from New Orleans, from everywhere else. And we have no say-so in what happens in our community either. And so I'm hoping to be more engaged in preserving life as we all would like to have it in South Louisiana, that just isn't listened to by our political leaders. And how helpless, even as somebody on the so-called on the inside, I'm helpless to do anything about it, it seems. So I guess that was most of what I mentioned. And we also had a woman from Oklahoma who was talking about how that agency culture is so important as well.
Thank you. Maida, do we have any more time, or are we?
Well, I don't see any more raised hands in the chat. There are some groups reporting out. So it just depends on how much time we can continue this.
I think it's about 1 now.
Yes.
So we're going to move on to the next. I think, Jonathan, we're going to throw it to you. Yeah. You're muted, Jonathan.
Hey, can you hear me now? Great. Okay, so the hope for the coast. In hopeless situations, there's really no need to respond to anything, right? Without hope, there's no reason for action. It's as simple as that. Right now, we need to find hope and hold on to it so that we have a reason to put the work in. And so that's why we want to know, where do you find hope in the current situation here in coastal Louisiana? We'd like for you to put that in the chat, and I'll read a few of those responses as they come into the entire group. And so while you're thinking on that, I'll share where I find my hope for the coast. I find hope in seeing that more people are starting to recognize the importance of our culture as a tool to address coastal challenges. So for me, seeing more people engage and hearing more things about how culture is beginning to have a seat at the land loss table, that makes me hopeful that we'll be able to live successful, fulfilled lives in the areas where we want to be. So that's my hope for the coast. Let's see in the chat. Some other things that folks are saying. Collective impact for policy advancement is the beauty of this gathering today. Our children are the hope for the future and need to explore this topic. Absolutely. Thank you for that very much.
I saw another post that said hope is in groups like this. So we appreciate that.
Yeah. Anybody else? The fight against climate change by the youth, agreed. I see hope in more young people more involved, agreed. A little boy walking in mud puddles and white shrimp boots after a rain, pulling a homemade wood boat made out of scrap wood. Yes, yes, 100%. Absolutely, Lenora, thank you for that. Our hope is in our tribal youth and the elders who remain passionate about raising awareness even as they face illness, loss of homes, etc., and in those returning to the area after living away because they want to fight for our area. Thank you for that. Dr. Alexander, I find hope in the strong voice and leadership of people like Jonathan and Mike and Shauna. I much appreciate the passion that you have. Thanks, Dr. Alexander, and it's so nice to see you there. Hope is how much you are willing to invest in the future. It's important that we tie the fight against the climate crisis to any cultural preservation. The reality of the impact of this crisis on the Native and of color communities is a priority. So I think we have to think about how to support these communities immediately. I find hope in art of the Bayou. Yes, yes. Hey, Brooks, thank you for being here. Shannon, hey, how are you? My student said that she is hopeful thanks to the presenters in the Zoom. Shannon, thank you so much for being with us. And thanks for sharing that with your students today. Mr. Earl, hope has become an elusive concept for me. I have been involved for over 4 decades. Each new state administration has smothered some of my hope. My hope is true consistency and understanding the connection of culture and coastal health. Very well said. Yeah, and we're also going to preserve all of these statements in the chat. So last one from well, we got 2 more real quick. This one's from Gabby. I find hope in the music and beauty of everything I've seen in the cities of Louisiana and down the bayou. And this will be the last one that we share so we can move on. But then we'll have all of these preserved so you can see them through a link. I hope that we can improve the quality of education so that it includes cultural and scientific knowledge in a way that is setting specific. Louisiana environmental education needs to be in every classroom, and many cultural practices rely on healthy ecosystems. So these 2 topics are directly related. Lauren, 100% with you on that. Please, for the rest of you, please feel free to continue reading what's in the chat. And thank you all for sharing what your hope is. That makes me hopeful, and I appreciate that a lot. Thanks.
All right. You know, again, just to reiterate what Jonathan was saying, all of these comments will be preserved in chat, and we'll be posting them in some form or another. So if you didn't hear your comment shared, they will be available for review. So real quickly, I'd like to go ahead and talk about what's going to be a fantastic meeting next month, February 18th. We'll be doing it at the same time, noon to 1:30. And we're gonna switch gears very slightly, but all within the overall plan. We're gonna have Craig Colton. He is the author of State of Disaster, a historical geography of Louisiana's land loss crisis. And in this book, he looks at cultural resilience, cultural survival, community resilience in coastal Louisiana. It's a really good book. He's a really great author and a really good speaker. So I really encourage all of you to join us for that meeting. Shauna, did you?
I just want to remind people that we are trying to move towards, you know, this is not just a series of talks that we're going to, and David, we'll try and make sure next time we have a more robust time for discussion, because we clearly heard that. And other ideas you have, please post them in the chat. We're going to be going over this very carefully and coming up with ideas and plans. So look for more announcements as we move forward. The Louisiana Folklore Society will be meeting April 1st and 2nd, and that's a chance for us to all work together in person on some of these ideas. And you can just go to louisianafolklore.org to learn more about that. And there are plenty of ways for you to connect with us. One of them I just mentioned, and you can always email Mike, right?
I am, email me with any questions, any queries, any comments, feedback. I will get back to you, and I am very interested in what you might have to say. So please do, please contact me. I'm available.
Thank you all for coming. And this is the end of our formal presentation portion. And so we're just going to have an informal discussion. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter and all those social media things. So thank you again, everybody, for coming.